All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show. And I am really excited for what I have for all of you today. I had a tweet that got quite a bit of attention last week, and that tweet was an article by Dave DeCamp on the National Endowment for Democracy. And so, of course, with that gained so much attention, and hopefully Dave's article gained a whole lot of reads. I had to bring Dave on the show to break it all down for us. So Dave DeCamp, he is the news editor of antiwar.com and the host of Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. Dave, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Kyle, thanks for having me back.
Very happy to have you back. So far, the only guest here at the Kyle Anzalone Show, but a great one. So, Dave, I had, just as I do every day, I tweet out all the articles that we run on antiwar.com, whether they're from you, Jason Ditz, or any of our great opinion writers. But this particular one got retweeted by Glenn Greenwald, and Glenn had said, the National Endowment for Democracy is a CIA front that is one of the most destructive, deceitful, and manipulative entities on the planet. This funding freeze should be permanent. And this got thousands of reposts, as well as, I believe, now about 13 million views. And then it was again reposted by Elon Musk, racking up another 13 million views. And Musk said, how much democracy have they managed to achieve in the past 10 years, given that democracy is what they've endowed for? And he said zero. So this is, again, all back to your article that you wrote for antiwar.com last week. Trump suspends funding to the National Endowment for Democracy. So, Dave, let's just start here. What the hell is the National Endowment for Democracy, and is it spreading democracy?
Well, the National Endowment for Democracy, they call it an NGO, a non-governmental organization, but of course it's funded by the U.S. government. That's why Trump was able to suspend the funding to it. And this organization was started in the 1980s as part of the Cold War. And the founders of it at the time basically said that the purpose of the NED was to do overtly what the CIA used to do covertly. And that is, supporting what they call pro-democracy movements. And this was specifically focused on the Soviet Union, on areas where the Soviet Union had, their spheres of influence during the Cold War. And then, of course, at the end of the Cold War, this was expanded, across the world. And they fund, again, under the guise of spreading democracy, they fund opposition groups across the world, and they stoke unrest, and they push regime change efforts against, so-called U.S. adversary governments. I put some good stuff in there from James Bovard from the Libertarian Institute, because he had a great article about how he's been bashing the NED for 40 years. And he listed some examples of the NED funding all these groups attempting regime change in Venezuela that led to like a bloody attempted coup, one in Haiti as well. And I mean, there's just endless examples of this. And so this is great news that the funding has been suspended, because this is one of those entities similar to USAID, which has gotten a lot more attention because I think it's bigger and it's actually an official wing of the U.S. government. But the NED, it's one of those things most people are just completely unaware of. And if you talk about it, you mention it, you sound like you're some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist or something saying, oh, the U.S. funds these regime change through this NGO. They support all these protests. But, the truth is coming out about NED and USAID and the meddling and interventions that they do across the globe. And I think that's really important. However this ends up, however this goes, if they end up getting their funding back, I think the good that comes out of it is more people being aware of this. And it's funny, too, because this was the scoop that the NED lost its funding was reported by Eli Lake at the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's outlet. And their article and her post on it was all, they're all sad about the NED losing its funding. But again, this is a very nefarious organization, and it stirs resentment in other countries against the U.S. So it's just a good thing overall that the funding has been frozen. And a tweet of mine that did pretty well on the same day was, all people need to know to support defunding the NED is the fact that Victoria Nuland is now on their board of directors. And, she came out of the Biden administration and went right over to the NED. And she was there before she came into the Biden administration. And, of course, she's notorious for her role in the 2014 coup in Ukraine and playing such a big part in the disaster that we see in Ukraine today. And that's who's been, she's lost some of her salary. I'm sure she's got some other means of income, but, that's good to know at least.
Right, right. So, Dave, and for we got quite a few people listening now. So, if you are listening live, be sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the like button, and if you are one of the many people watching live on X, go ahead and repost this and get it out there to a few more people. Dave, one of the quotes, maybe my favorite quote in your article, and this might sound surprising for a couple of guys who work at antiwar.com. You write in there, "It's been a bloodbath." And so what does that mean to the NED staffers? And more importantly, what is kind of the status of the funding for this agency? We've seen a few times where it seems that maybe Trump is doing the right thing, but who knows if it will stick or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question about all of this. And, it seems like Elon Musk, this is part of the DOGE thing, the Department of Government Efficiency. It's almost like a corporate takeover. Like when a new boss comes into a corporation, they basically clean house and fire everybody and then kind of go over, okay, who do we need? Who was useful? And then they start bringing people back in, rehiring people, bringing in new people. And it almost seems like that's what's happening right now with the U.S. government. And, if we see what Marco Rubio has been saying about USAID is that, that most of their functions are going to continue, that it's being brought under control of the State Department. Not really clear what the situation is with the NED, but that NED staffer told Eli Lake was, it's a bloodbath, meaning basically they've lost all their funding, they're not getting paid, the organization has been completely crippled, basically. So again, that's good, but where is this going to go exactly? We don't really know. It does seem part of this whole thing we're seeing from Musk is because Musk has supported regime change efforts. He was really boosting stuff in Venezuela recently. It almost seems like a part of this is they want these organizations to be better, more efficient at what they're supposed to do instead of all this kind of wasteful spending. Kind of the silly things that might not seem as nefarious, but that we keep hearing from DOGE that the U.S. is wasting money on. But as kind of a regime change apparatus, they might want to keep some elements of that. I'm sure Marco Rubio does. I mean, there's no question about that. It
Right.
just depends on how much control he's going to have over where this all goes.
Well, Dave, that's a great point because if you listen to the Trump camp, a lot of their issues are, oh, we don't want to fund the transgender orchestra in Malaysia, or we don't care about, promoting gay teachers in El Salvador. And certainly, I do understand why the US government shouldn't be handing out money for these types of programs in all these different countries. And at times, I'm sure that, handing out this money in these countries is a way to, either prop up friendly governments or to inject money into dissident organizations. But that is what's getting a lot of the attention. And these are examples of obvious waste. I just wrote an article for the Libertarian Institute that'll be out shortly that said 60% of Americans believe that USAID funds don't go to the actual people they're intended to, and they're either stolen through corruption or wasted. I think what people fail to realize is that a huge chunk of this money is actually going to facilitate either regime change operations or preventing them, a group of dissidents in the country who are there naturally, who want to, either rise up against the or demand regime changes, and that's not happening. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Do you think we're going to have any curtailing of the more nefarious covert actions of these agencies?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I think it does seem like, again, just watching what, Elon Musk is saying, it seems like some of his attention is on that at least. So, and it depends on, if they're really reviewing these activities and what USAID does. Essentially what they say they're doing is a review of everything to see if it's benefiting the interests of the U.S. And in some areas of the world, the Marco Rubio State Department might decide that they don't want to, destabilize or overthrow governments here. It seems like they are kind of going away with throwing away the notion that the U.S. is trying to spread democracy around the world. It seems like that idea, they're just not going to play that game anymore. That's one thing about the Biden administration that was so hypocritical. They had all this rhetoric about democracy, human rights, and freedom of the press, and they helped Israel murder like a few hundred journalists in Gaza. And that was very obvious to the world. With Trump, it's more just like, we're going to intervene when it benefits us. We're going to take resources. So that just this whole spreading democracy thing, I think Trump's people are realizing that they should just forget about that whole aspect of it. But at the same time, in some situations, they're going to want to, destabilize governments in certain areas of the world.
Yeah. Dave, we had a really great comment from Adam. When it comes to Victoria Nuland, I say "niet" means "niet." So that's very funny, referencing the memo there. So, Dave, we have this clip from Elon Musk, and can we go ahead and play this clip about Musk dealing with lawsuits? Because I do think that this could come into play here. All right, so we're working on that clip. But Dave, before we move on here, I did want to just ask, so with the National Endowment for Democracy, as you said, there's a lot of people who chalk this all up to conspiracy theories, that this is just people think it's undermining, but it's just distributing aid to poor people in countries who really do need US aid. What can you give us an example, like particularly in Ukraine, how involved was the NED USAID in operations in that country?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, going back to Newland, this is kind of an infamous quote of hers these days. In 2013, when the Maidan was going, she said that since the fall of the Soviet Union, the U.S. spent $5 billion on, I forget exactly her language, but it was supporting, pro-democracy groups and things like that. And that's what she's referring to, is USAID and the NED. And when we talk about government spending, especially military, $5 billion might not sound like a lot considering the Pentagon budget and everything. But if you look at that money goes a lot further when it comes to funding opposition groups, media outlets in other countries. And this is all about kind of this promoting this new form of imperialism that the U.S. pursued after the end of the Cold War, again, in the name of spreading freedom and democracy. And so, again, it is just very nefarious, and it has led to much of the destruction that we've seen in the world today, especially in eastern Ukraine.
All right, Dave. Well, I'm very happy to have you on so much to talk about that article, but there is so much other stuff going on in the world. And I thought, since I had you on anyways, I could get a few of your thoughts, particularly on this press conference between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Marco Rubio, where Rubio, I think has been surprisingly articulate during his time as Secretary of State. Maybe it's just a very low bar that Antony Blinken set, but he just, I think, appears more confident on the world stage, which is interesting. And he really does at least seem to be trying to articulate what he's saying as, this is what Donald Trump believes, and I'm here representing the president of the United States, which I found to be a little bit interesting, because I thought maybe this would be the guy in his administration that's really looking to undermine his foreign policy. And maybe we've seen that a little bit in Latin America, but I think when it comes to the Middle East, it seems like he's very in line with the president. So can we go ahead and play this first clip of Benjamin Netanyahu at the press conference with Marco Rubio?
I want to assure everyone who's now listening to us, President Trump and I are working in full cooperation and coordination between us. We have a common strategy, and we can't always share the details of this strategy with the public, including when the gates of hell will be opened, as they surely will if all our hostages are not released until the last one of them.
So, Dave, I think this is really interesting. First of all, what do you think of the comment here that Netanyahu and Trump are acting in complete coordination? Is this just maybe Bibi trying to set the tone, Bibi trying to have a lot of bluster, or is this? Do you think he's accurate in what he's saying here?
Well, you said about Rubio. I think in some cases it's good. I mean, he's going to Saudi Arabia tomorrow to speak with the Russians about peace in Ukraine. I mean, it's great that that's happening. But when it comes to the Middle East, I do think Trump and Netanyahu, they do seem to be aligned. I mean, unless Trump, told Netanyahu something behind the scenes that we don't know, he's given Israel and Netanyahu the green light to restart the bombing campaign and siege in Gaza. He said that multiple times that he would support that if they don't release all the hostages right away. And of course, that's not going to happen. That's not part of the ceasefire deal. The thing is, and this actually puts more pressure on Netanyahu from kind of his right, these guys like Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, who are urging him to start bombing Gaza again, because now they have a president in the U.S. that's more extreme than Netanyahu. So it's not going to lead. It's not leading in a good direction. And again, unless Trump told him something behind the scenes, but that also doesn't really matter because the signal being sent to Hamas right now is that Israel's not going to implement the full ceasefire deal. We saw last week they said they were going to postpone the hostage release. They ended up going ahead with it, but everything is just really shaky and fragile, and Trump just won't drop this whole Gaza takeover thing, and it's just not a good sign. And even with Iran now, I mean, Trump has basically been saying, I want a deal, we're not going to bomb Iran, I want a deal, but then he starts imposing sanctions, and then he starts saying things like, I hope we reach a deal because I really don't want to bomb them, basically saying if we don't reach some kind of deal, then the U.S. is going to bomb them or support Israel against Iran. So that's a bad sign. And that's another thing that Netanyahu and Rubio spoke about at that press conference. So, things are real shaky again with that ceasefire. I just think things aren't looking great, the prospect of the situation in the Middle East.
Yeah, so I'm wondering what you think is the play here. It kind of seems to me that Netanyahu, at least, and maybe Trump acting in coordination here, seem to be trying to create the conditions that Hamas feels they have to either, not that they maybe have to break the ceasefire, but there's no point in them continuing to participate in the ceasefire because they're not going to get any benefits. I believe I read articles from you this week saying that not only is Israel continuing to bomb the Strip, but they're really not letting aid in either that was agreed to under the ceasefire deal.
Yeah, that was something I wrote up today. So last week, it seemed like Hamas, because that was like their big complaint, was that Israel's not letting in enough tents and mobile homes. And you have Palestinians in Gaza living in these horrendous conditions. And they want mobile homes, like trailers to come in. And it looked like when Hamas did the thing last week saying, we're going to postpone the hostage release, then that Israel agreed to start letting that stuff in, which they were supposed to do so under the ceasefire deal. But it turns out they still haven't let that stuff in. So yeah, there's always that chance of Hamas, saying that they're going to stop with the deal because it's their only leverage is the hostages. That's the only piece of leverage that they have over the U.S. and Israel. So they're not going to just let them all out if they don't think this deal is going to be completely implemented, which means Israeli withdrawal, full withdrawal from Gaza, and the reconstruction beginning with the Palestinians staying in Gaza. So yeah, it's really just not. And another thing that Israeli media is reporting, so they're supposed to start talks on the second phase of the ceasefire deal on the 16th day of the ceasefire. So that was like February 3rd. But that hasn't happened yet. And Israel, the media is reporting now that Israel's going to try to just extend the first phase, which means they want to get more hostages out without completely withdrawing from Gaza and doing other things that Hamas wants. So again, if Hamas sees that that's what Israel's trying to do, it might seem to them that Israel's trying to get as many hostages out as they can before they restart the war. And I do think that Netanyahu, the Israeli military, they know that this is the only chance to really get the hostages out. So I think they're going to, the way I see this going is them dragging it out and trying to get as many hostages as they can while still like violating aspects of the ceasefire and then eventually using some excuse to restart. Hopefully I'm wrong and the full thing's implemented. But I just don't. That just doesn't look good going forward.
Yeah. No, and it seems like it's the same old game plan from Netanyahu that we saw during the Biden administration, where Tel Aviv would agree to participate in talks, and then they send a representative to the negotiations. But Netanyahu specifically tells the representative, you can't offer any ideas. You can't put the Israeli perspective forward. You could hear what the other side has to say and bring that back to us, but that's all they're going to allow. Now, the other last thing I just want to note in that clip, and I find it very interesting that Trump and Rubio and Netanyahu keep talking about opening the gates of hell, which would seem to be some kind of admission that they are the devil in all of this, which I mean is pretty accurate given what we're seeing. I mean, Dave, I just read horrific stories from you every day. One that you wrote, I think, published on antiwar.com yesterday. They put a bomb around the neck of an 80-year-old man and forced him to go and look through houses looking for IEDs for 8 hours. Then they murdered him and his wife. I mean, just horror stories every single day coming out of Gaza. But I do want to move on and play this Nets clip from Marco Rubio speaking Nets to Benjamin Netanyahu.
The common theme in all of these challenges is Iran. It is the single greatest source of instability in the region. Behind every terrorist group, behind every act of violence, behind every destabilizing activity, behind everything that threatens peace and stability for the millions of people who call this region home, is Iran.
So, Dave, this is one of the most concerning things to me about Trump re-entering the White House. I mean, we are seeing positive steps on the Ukraine front and maybe engaging with the Russians. Certainly a positive change in policy and outlook on diplomacy from the Biden administration. But when it comes to Iran, the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration and from Tel Aviv is very concerning. I remember during the Biden administration, the head of the Navy and the head of the Air Force would say things like, I don't sleep at night because of the China threat. All I think about is China, China, China. And they tout this. They tout their paranoia as qualifying them to do the job and the basis for policy. And it seems like that's what we're seeing here from Marco Rubio. Is Iran really all that's evil that lurks in the world? And I guess more importantly, the question I really want to ask you here is, what do you think are the possibilities that Israel gets the United States in a war with Iran during this Trump administration?
You know, he also said in that press conference that if there were more countries like Israel in the world, there would be more peace and stabilization. So it's just kind of absurd. But I mean, I still find it hard to believe that Trump is going to go along with a war with Iran. Again, the threats that we're seeing from him saying, oh, I hope there's a deal or else I have to bomb them. You know, that's concerning, but I still think it's unlikely that he's going to back any sort of attack like that unless things explode in Gaza and we start seeing the Houthis start attacking Israel again, start attacking shipping in the Red Sea. The Shia militias in Iraq might start launching attacks. Hezbollah, I mean, Hezbollah hasn't done anything as Israel's continued its occupation of southern Lebanon in like a very flagrant violation of the ceasefire deal. But the situation, you know, if it explodes like that, then who knows where things could go, especially if Americans start getting killed either in the bases in Iraq and Syria or in the Red Sea, you know, battle with the Houthis. Then Trump might do something big and support an attack on Iran. So I really think all of this, everything in the region kind of hinges on what happens in Gaza.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think you're right about that, Dave. And if we could continue to in this ceasefire, then yeah, it makes war with Iran much less likely. Now, one of the big debates going on, Dave, has really been is how serious is Trump about his proposal to take over the Gaza Strip. So I got one more clip of little Marco Rubio for you to suffer through, and then I'll get your response to that. Let's go ahead and play this last clip from Rubio.
The hostages need to come home. They need to be released. And you work in very close coordination with him. He's working in very close coordination, but with the Prime Minister and his government, and ensuring that happens. That must happen. It's not optional. And would add that that's a goal we share in common, and that is something we work on very closely together. The President's also been very bold about his view of what the future for Gaza should be. Not the same tired ideas of the past, but something that's new, bold, and something that frankly took courage and vision in order to outline. And it may have shocked and surprised many, but what cannot continue is the same cycle where we repeat over and over again and wind up in the exact same place. Related to that, the president's been very clear. Hamas cannot continue as a military or government force. And frankly, as long as it stands as a force that can govern, or as a force that can administer, or as a force that can threaten by use of violence, peace becomes impossible. They must be eliminated. It must be eradicated.
So first, I just want to say we're getting a ton of great comments on YouTube that were popping up on the screen here. So if anybody has thoughts they would like to add into the conversation, please drop a comment. And if you are watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel. Now, Dave, I want to ask you, do you think Donald Trump that this is just some great 3D, 10D chess, however many dimensions you have to make this make sense? Or is he really serious about this proposal to take over Gaza?
I find it hard to believe that he's serious about actually taking over Gaza. I think in his head, he's trying to negotiate a deal where essentially the Arab countries agree to take all the Palestinians. I do think his end goal is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. I really think he believes that will solve the problem, when in reality, that attempting that with Hamas still intact, as has been very clear with these videos of the hostage releases, it would just completely destabilize the region if they try to go through with this. I think he really does have a fundamental misunderstanding of the issues in the region, just judging by him always saying, oh, if I was president, this would have never happened. I signed the Abraham Accords. I was bringing peace to the region, even though the Abraham Accords were not peace deals. They were normalization deals between countries that were not at war. And they went over the head of the Palestinians. They didn't deal with the issue of Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. And until that issue's dealt with, then the violence will continue. And dealing with it by helping Israel commit ethnic cleansing and genocide is just going to completely destabilize things. I mean, you see King Abdullah of Jordan, the situation he's in, because if there is a big fluctuation of Palestinian refugees to Jordan, to Egypt, I mean, it's an existential threat to these Arab leaders that are puppets of the U.S., that are collaborators with Israel. So things it just seems like Trump doesn't understand any of this. Every time he talks about it, it's just, it's someone who has gotten their understanding of the region from a guy like Jared Kushner, it seems like, or some of his other real estate friends in New York.
Yeah. And that plan does seem to be pretty well thought out. Initially when Trump just says we're going to take over Gaza, we're going to turn into the Riviera of the Middle East. Well, maybe that is just Trump saying things, but this is a plan that Jared Kushner has put forward and has actually been laid out in quite some detail. Now, what's going to happen to the Palestinians in Gaza is a big question. And I think Netanyahu gave us a little bit of that answer recently. So I have one more clip for you, Dave. Let's play this last clip of Benjamin Netanyahu.
I just come back from a historic visit to Washington with President Trump. I can categorically say that I don't think there was any more consequential meeting of a prime minister and a president than this meeting, because we are reshaping the Middle East.
Netanyahu adds in there, Dave, that the Gazans can leave. Right. He's actually, I think he uses the phrase that this isn't an open air prison. Right. And that this isn't a situation where the Gazans are locked in. He says, I guess they could all go into the Sinai or whatever. So is this the plan here? We've heard voluntary migration. Earlier in the war, we heard Netanyahu was in contact with like Rwanda and the Congo and Chad about taking the Palestinians in. What is actually the thinking here in Tel Aviv on what's going to happen to the Palestinians?
I mean, I think that's been the ultimate goal from the beginning. We saw leaked documents from the Israeli government that their best case scenario was for every single Palestinian in Gaza to go into the Sinai desert and for them to live in camps there. And then we saw them, you mentioned, discussing countries in Africa, that might take Palestinians. It seems like they've been exploring the idea of kind of scattering them around the world. We even saw the defense minister, Katz, say that they should go to Spain and Ireland and Norway, these countries that have criticized what Israel's doing in Gaza, send them to the West. We've seen Israeli members of the Knesset say that, send them to Western countries. So I think they're trying to devise some kind of plan like that. Take a few 10,000 here, put them there, put 100,000 here, because I think it is clear to them that Israel and Jordan and Egypt are not going to take part in this. And Smotrich, another thing I just wrote for antiwar.com, the finance minister, he says they're going to start moving people in the coming weeks. And I find it hard to believe. I mean, the fact is that the Israeli military is tired. It does seem like the top brass realistically doesn't think that they can, eradicate Hamas and everything. So I think that's a big factor here. But again, it seems like this has been the plan. This has really been Netanyahu's, again, best case scenario. This is what they really want, but they probably didn't think it was realistic. But now you have the president of the United States saying it's what should happen. So I think they are putting much more serious thought into it. And the thing that I fear the most is that everything just restarts. They impose the siege again. They don't let anything in, bombing. And then Trump and Netanyahu just say, well, they could leave if they want. They could go into Egypt. If they let them, they should let them in and kind of put the blame on Egypt for not letting the Palestinians come in.
Well, Dave, I got to agree with you there. If they restart the bombing, so many Gazans have returned home to northern Gaza, although they don't have homes. I just read a report from Doctors Without Borders saying everything has been destroyed. I think it was The Guardian reported that 92% of all homes in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed at this point. And so, it was one thing for Israel to carry out this ruthless bombing campaign in October and November of 2023, pushing millions of over 1 million Palestinians out of northern Gaza to the south. But back then, people were living in homes. Now they're just in tents. Donald Trump has just given them more 2,000-pound bombs. As Donald Trump has already admitted, Gaza still has tunnels all over the place, and there's been unexploded ordnances laying all over that Hamas has been picking up for weeks and machining into new weapons to fire. And so I really agree with you here that this could turn into a very brutal situation, not only for the civilians of Gaza, but also for the Israeli military if they attempt to go in and really cleanse the Palestinians. I guess at this point, though, it does seem that overwhelming number of Israelis are on board with this plan. So I think there's a real risk it could happen. Dave, thank you so much for coming back on the show today. I really am grateful that, you're my first and only guest so far. You are the man at antiwar.com. Every single day, everybody listening, Dave DeCamp writes 5, 6, if it's a big news day, sometimes 10 articles. And look, you could go to Reuters, you could go to the Associated Press, and if you read these stories that Dave has here, they're going to be all this deep state propaganda embedded with it. There's a reason. I'm sure when USAID or the U.S. government is spending $44,000 on all these Politico Plus subscriptions, I'm sure there's a little, editorial decision making that goes along with that on making sure that the narrative in the mainstream media is the deep state narrative. But that is not what you find at antiwar.com. And so much of our great content is thanks to Dave DeCamp. So, Dave, thank you again for returning to the show, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming and joining me and Dave as we talked about these issues on today's show. I was really appreciative to have Dave here again. He's just a fantastic guest and knows so much and knows these issues inside and out because he is covering it every single day, so many aspects of the American empire. We had a fairly large and a very active audience today, so all of you who are commenting on the YouTube video, I really appreciate that. It's really fun to be able to see people giving their opinions on what me and Dave are talking about. And so I hope you all will continue to do that in the future. If you're still listening to the show, be sure you subscribe to it. It's very helpful if you do it on YouTube. Give us a like, but if you're listening on X, repost and follow the channel, and we'll be back with another episode soon.